If you studied Latin at O-level, as I did, you might remember that one of the set books was Caesar's Gallic Wars, and the opening sentence was, "The whole of Gaul was divided into 3 parts." Well, if it was true of Gaul, it was also true of Thurso. At least, it was with regards to the population. The tourists, transient. The locals, long established. The atomics, imported. And I was one of the atomics. You may remember that my journey to Thurso, the first time I ever went there, the first time I ever saw the town, had been very much pain. I am delighted to report that when I finally arrived there, being in Thurso was pleasure. Everyone was very welcoming, and it was almost as if the people had been waiting for me. Well, since I was a new wife, in one case, hopefully, that was actually true. There was so much to do. There were clubs and societies and sports and individual friendships to make and bond. In fact, it was a bit like going to a different university, because so many of the young people there who had come to work at the Atomic Energy Authority had come pretty much straight from the university. And so I very quickly felt at home. And home? Well, home was the house, or rather half a house, that my husband had rented and been living in while I was still at boarding school. It was a rather quirky house. The front door absolutely right onto the pavement. When you went in the front door, to the right there was a staircase. To the left, a door into the only downstairs room. And opposite the front door, a blank wall. If you looked very carefully, there were slight clues that once upon a time there had been a door there as well. The downstairs room was big. It had a sink, and the sink was under the kitchen window, and the window was, like the front door, right onto the pavement. There was a gas stove, a gas boiler, and the weirdest gas clothes dryer I have ever seen before or since. It certainly worked in that clothes in it got dry, but anything that came out of it came out as stiff and as rigid as if it was made of cardboard. There was also a table and some chairs. Going up the stairs, there was a very cosy, somewhat Edwardian sitting room with lots of comfy furniture and lots of bric-a-brac and soft furnishings and cushions and an open fireplace to have in the winter months an open fire. The window was right onto the road, and the road looked across to a little square. Every Saturday night, after I'd lived there for a while, I was terrified that I was going to be lynched, because the town pipe band would parade in the little square and play the pipes. Now, I'm very fond of the sound of bagpipes, and so I think was my husband. But the very first time we heard them coming down the road, he threw up the window, casement window, put his head through and called out, "Ahoy, the jocks are coming!" I was pretty cross. I said that it was rude and we didn't want to make any problems between us and the neighbours. He thought it was funny, and the more I protested, the more determined he was that he would greet the pipe band in this manner every week. I am pleased to say that if people did hear, they accepted it as a greeting and not as anything pejorative. That's exactly the way referring to us as the Atomics was felt. It was never felt to be rude. It was always felt to be just a statement of fact. There was also a little bedroom with a large and comfortable double bed. Slight problem there, the bed took up most of the available space. And the room had one window which overlooked a garden, a long, thin, vastly overgrown garden with evidence that there had once been a path from the house to a different street which was at the bottom of the garden. We never found a route from the house into that garden, or actually the end of the road which then led back to the house. Why it had been boarded off and at what point in the past was always a mystery. And then there was the lavatory with a fairly generous wash basin and its own gas water heater. One of those water heaters where you turn on the tap and you hope the pilot light is working and you press the button for the gas, and after a little while there is the sort of bang that makes you jump out of your skin and the water begins to become warm. I must have used that little heater many times a day for all the months we lived there. I never got used to the bang. I always knew it was going to happen, and it never indicated anything untoward except a loud noise, but it always made me jump. Have you noticed the problem? Yes, there was a problem. There was no bath, and there was no shower. There was a third floor, and you could go up the stairs to the third floor, and there you would come across 2 large rooms that were empty. And when I say empty, I mean empty. How were we to cope with our ablutions? Well, on a day-to-day basis, one could, as it were, wash on the instalment plan. But we had made friends with the people that we originally stayed with when we were on our rather shortened honeymoon. They were keen bridge players. My husband was a keen bridge player, and I was a vaguely competent bridge player. So a ritual was quickly established that once a week we would visit our friends for bridge and bath. And it all seemed to work fine, if a bit unorthodox. One of the problems that did, however, occur was I hadn't been there for very long before I started to experience symptoms like extreme hay fever. Itchy eyes, runny nose, sneezing, swelling of the face, and I went to the doctor. As it happened, when I got to the doctor, bearing in mind I'd never been before, I discovered that I already was quite friendly with the man because we were of similar age and I had joined the choral society and he sang in the choral society. I explained my symptoms and that I didn't really think it was hay fever, and he said, in a lovely Scottish accent, which I won't attempt to mimic, had I done anything different in the last weeks or months? I grinned and said, well, I was living in a different country, I was living in a different house, I was married to a new husband, I had a new job, and he said, oh, don't go on, because although that information was helpful, it was rather difficult to actually tie down which of those changes had brought about my symptoms. At this point, I thought there was one thing that wasn't new, and that I wasn't keen to be new. And that reminded me that many of the young women who came to live in Thurso, especially newly married ones like me, were taunted with the fact that the particular nuclear reactor at Dounreay was called a fast breeder reactor. And fast breeding was not part of my plan. So the doctor explained to me that the contraceptive of choice at that time was the pill. New, adventurous, and somewhat controversial in some camps. And he was sure, however, that I was the sort of girl who would cope with that. And I was pretty sure I was too, and so I was duly given a prescription to take the pill. Some weeks later, I went to see the doctor again, having seen him every week at the Choral Society anyway. And he said to me, how were my hay fever symptoms? And unfortunately, they were pretty much the same. Not worse, but pretty much the same. And then he said, and how are you getting on with the pill? And I said, well, I haven't taken it. To which he replied, "Och, Jeanie, don't say you're scared." "No," said I, "I'm not scared. I'm pregnant." At that point, he forgot that he was my doctor and remembered that he was my friend, and as a friend would, roared with laughter and said something which, in spite of the Scottish accent, sounded remarkably like "too late, ho, ho." I'll tell you some more soon. Bye-bye.